It is 8:44 a.m. Mr. Castillo, could we do the roll call, please?
Chair Hampton.
Present.
Commissioner Blair.
Present.
Commissioner Rangel. Not present. Commissioner Bagley. Not present. Commissioner Baring. Commissioner Hall.
Here, present.
And Commissioner Reeves.
I'm here. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you. So we have a quorum. Our discussion item on our agenda today is I believe, Mr. Castillo, you will read that out. I'm getting ahead of myself. My apologies.
Okay. For consideration today, consideration of amending the Dallas Development Code, Chapter 51A-4.1100, mixed income housing, to support and align with the One Dallas Options Program within the City of Dallas Comprehensive Housing Policy.
Thank you. Mr. Doss, do you have an update for us from our last meeting? And Ms. Thompson, good morning, Ms. Thompson.
Good morning, committee. We do have a presentation and an update from last meeting. All right, Pam, you helped me out last time. I am sharing the correct screen, right?
Or not, actually. You're sharing the presenter view rather than the display view.
And
While we get the presentation up, I also
go.
wanted to acknowledge that Commissioner Melissa Kingston is with us today. Thank you, Commissioner Kingston.
all right, with that, so as Mr. Castillo mentioned, the consideration of amending the Dallas Development Code, Chapter 51A, 4.1100, mixed income housing, to support and align with One Dallas Options Program within the City of Dallas Comprehensive Housing Policy. We are going to go a little bit of repeat background from our last meeting, and then get into some of the updates from that have transpired between October 21st and today. So Pam, if you wouldn't mind, just again our kind of brief overview, and we'll move forward from there.
Sure. So just as a reminder, this One Dallas Options is an expansion of the mixed income housing development bonus that exists already. And it intends to offer three forms of incentives: administrative, financial, and regulatory. And also then there will be a menu of options for compliance: on-site, land dedication, or a fee to be paid in lieu of providing those reserved units. And that fee, just as a reminder, is to be set high enough so that the on-site provision is financially more viable in all but the most expensive high-rise developments, because we have heard many stakeholders are concerned that they'll just pay the fee in lieu and they won't provide mixed income housing. And so we want to make sure that we preference on-site provision. That fee in lieu will then go to a new One Dallas fund, and that One Dallas fund can be used to pay gap financing, to make housing more affordable to families that otherwise wouldn't be able to afford it, or to do other programs within the comprehensive housing policy. So on the offsite provision, after consideration sort of belies the truth of, I talked to a bunch of folks, brought a brain trust together, talked to staff above me, talked to staff, my colleagues, talked to a bunch of other people. And we are currently no longer proposing the offsite provision as an option. ZOAC last meeting, you'll remember, had quite a bit of angst over that. And so we are going to say that reserved units must be provided on site, or a fee in lieu paid, or land dedicated with city council approval. So we've taken this offsite provision off the table at this point. You can move it, yeah. So, and then just a little more background on the proposed H-team process. And the H-team process is just a nickname for what we're calling it right now, so we can kind of get our heads wrapped around it. Currently, the city offers a Q-team process. This is where an applicant pays for an accelerated plan review. They all group together in a meeting. Everybody gets around the table. They go through the plans, and fire and stormwater and engineering. Everybody gets to weigh in on it. And then at the end of the meeting, the idea is that they walk out with a permit, but that is never the case. What they do is they walk out with essentially a punch list of deficiencies, and they go work that punch list. And then they get a permit after addressing those items. So although in the code, chapter 52, it literally says, you know, same day permit, that's not how it ends up working because real life happens. So we're proposing a similar team, whether it's an H team or a second Q team or something like that, that would prioritize these mixed income projects. So next slide. And then just a little more expansion on the fee in lieu option. That fee will be set at a level that preferences on-site provision. It can also help inform future potential One Dallas updates that could allow for non-residential projects to access a bonus in exchange for payment into the One Dallas Fund. And then all of the funds are going to go into a proposed One Dallas Fund, and that use would be guided by the comprehensive housing policy. But just expanding on that second bullet for a second, folks had asked, you know, what about commercial linkage fees? You know, office buildings draw jobs, but they also draw new people, which means that they draw a need for new housing, and they should essentially pay their fair share as well. And we agree, we're just going to need to do this iteratively right now. We'll see how this fee works with multifamily, and then do a deep dive into how we can do the commercial in a second round sometime in 2022. Next slide. And I'll hand it back to you, Stephen.
Thank you, Pam. So as Pam mentioned, those are some of those changes that would be housed in either the comprehensive housing policy in Chapter 20A, or in the case of the H team, the administrative incentives, those would be housed in Chapter 52. So we have a little bit more of that background information. So now we're going to move into purview of Chapter 51A and the zoning code, and we're going to walk through. There are a few adjustments we've made to the proposed amendments to 51A based on discussions from last week, and then just based on further refinement internally. We'll decide to go. So this was an item that was brought to our attention about these public deed restrictions. So, and this is would be page of the ordinance. Proposed conditions would be page 8 of the case report for the actual ordinance change. All the highlighted text is a new change between last meeting and today. So currently, under the mixed income housing development program as written, if a property has a base zoning district, MF or MU, but also has public deed restrictions that do anything other than further restrict allowed uses, Chapter 51A strictly prohibits those properties from taking advantage of the mixed income housing bonus process. The problem with that is that there are some sites that have been rezoned, that have been had a change in zoning, have a base zone, and have a set of stakeholder-driven deed restrictions that involve development standards that may have been planning to take advantage of the mixed income bonuses, and may have done so very explicitly in all of their work. So now we read the ordinance now, and well, they're not allowed to use the bonus. So there's no incentive there to provide that mixed income housing. So this proposed amendments to this section are just to remove that very broad restriction, and just make clear that a project that has base zoning and a public deed restriction that may restrict a development standard can still take advantage of the regulatory bonuses, the current bonuses that are not changing under the mixed income housing development program. However, whatever standard is more restrictive, whether that's the base zoning, the design standards that go along with the bonus, or the public deed restrictions, the most restrictive standard applies. So that is just a kind of a small change in language, kind of standard language that we see in a lot of ordinances. You know, in the event of a conflict between public deed restriction and this division, the more restrictive standard applies. We've also added some language to make clear that if a project is developed in a planned development district, generally that planned development district will control. So this is going to allow sites that have base zoning and public deed restrictions to take advantage of the current unchanged bonus structure. We also, at our last meeting, had a lot of discussion about the parking reduction. And this is what we're discussing here is specific to these, what we're calling the new menu of options, the One Dallas options parking reduction bonus. So again, this is only applicable to type 3 developments. So those are new or amended planned development districts that expressly reference compliance with the One Dallas options section of the ordinance. And those would be allowed to use the parking reduction to reduce their parking minimum for all uses on the site, except for those we have listed here. These are some of those high parking intense uses that we don't think it may not be appropriate to allow those to go to 100% parking reduction. These would still have to meet the minimums of their use per Chapter 51A. And then this kind of goes along with that, but in terms of the new One Dallas options, the applicability of those bonuses, essentially we talked about if we have a mixed use project with residential and commercial, what portion of the projects get to use what bonuses. So the first two, so for the dwelling unit bonus, that only applies to residential uses because it's only for dwelling units. For the floor area ratio bonus, that is only going to apply to residential floor area. So you would have to calculate your floor area for commercial and floor area for residential separately, and the bonus, whether it's a +1 or +1.5, you can only use that additional floor area ratio for residential for dwelling units. And that's because the whole program is designed to incentivize actual production of housing and not just provide the units with the bonus and then use that bonus for additional commercial floor space. The whole point is to produce housing. And then the height bonus applies to all uses in the project because that's, a lot of these projects are mixed use. So it doesn't really make sense if we have a residential height can go to X feet, but commercial height's limited, but the ground floor is commercial. It just makes just simpler to apply, and it applies to all uses for the development. Same for the parking reduction, except for those uses that we previously mentioned. And so these are the, this is some, I apologize, some further discussion of how the One Dallas option bonuses, this new menu of options, works together with the development itself. So again, these type 3 developments are the only developments that have access to these new the menu of option bonuses, and those are only available in new or amended PDs. So because even with an existing PD, to access these new bonuses, they would have to go through an amendment process to incorporate by reference compliance with this section. They would have to go all the way through CPC. They'd have to start as staff, go to CPC, and then go all the way to City Council for approval. The entire reason behind having PDs is to make site-specific standards. So through that process of staff, CPC, and City Council, there could be situations where the council or commission could recommend limitations on those bonuses, and that would be listed in the PD itself. So the PD would reference compliance with this section, and then let's say if the council and commission believes that the maximum, there should be a minimum amount of parking, regardless of whether their bonus allows them to reduce 100%, to remove all of their parking. They get that 100% reduction. The PD itself could place a minimum number of spaces. It could place a minimum ratio. It could even limit height. It could limit any one of those bonuses and include site-specific standards. It could even, spatially limit those bonuses. It could say that, well, this, even if the project does provide X number of reserved units for this income band, on this portion of the property is shown in the development plan, they don't get that height bonus, or that height bonus is limited to maximum height of X, and then allow the full bonus to be on the rest of the property. So that's the flexibility that a PD gives you, and that's that kind of additional layer of review and discretion that the CPC and council have to review the whole development plan, and then take into consideration those bonuses and how those bonuses may relate to the full development. So with that, the next steps in these, if the committee desires, would be to forward these proposed amendments to the City Plan Commission for consideration, and then Pam has scheduled, has the whole package of One Dallas options scheduled to be briefed to the Housing and Homelessness Solutions Committee of City Council in December. And then, of course, all of these would be run through their respective committees or commissions or boards, and then presented to City Council for final approval and adoption. So with that, if there are any further questions, we are here to answer those.
Questions?
I have a few.
Commissioner Kingston.
Thank you. I appreciate today's presentation because it focuses in on a lot of the things I had as questions. I still really want to see the details of what's being proposed in order to consider, whether these incentives match the housing we're getting and all of that kind of stuff. One of my concerns is that you're proposing H-team, which you liken it to Q-team. And in my experience, and from almost everyone I've ever talked to about Q-team, that process doesn't work. And so I'd like to understand, or for us to consider how we make H-team actually work for the customers. And I think a couple of things would be helpful. Number one, I think that staff would be required to provide the applicant a written list of the things that they need to address within a certain number of days, and that initial meeting, when they present the project to you, unless there's a material change in the project, staff gets one shot at making those recommendations. Because one of the things I hear over and over about Q-team is people will go in for a Q-team meeting, they'll get recommendations, sometimes they aren't in writing, and then when they go back to another Q-team meeting, there's a whole new list of things that weren't discussed the first time. And that's not a good use of staff time. It's not a good use of developer time. So that's something I think we need to focus in on this proposal.
Commissioner Kingston,
yes.
If I may, and Mr. Doss or Ms. Thompson, I'm not sure who's the best person to ask this. The H-team that's proposed, it's before us, I think, to understand the global sort of approach that staff is taking, but H-team is actually within Chapter 52. Is that correct? Or I may have the wrong chapter, but it's not in 51A.
Correct.
Okay.
Q-team as written is in Chapter 52. And this H-team as floated here, I'm not even really willing to say proposed yet here, because we're still kind of working through what this would look like. Would either be in 52, or we would just create a second dedicated Q-team, or BI would come up with something that does a similar thing. The idea at the end of the day is that if you're providing mixed income housing in the city of Dallas, you go to the front of the line, you're prioritized, and your expedited is already in the code, and so I don't really want to use that, but you're essentially prioritized and expedited. You go to the front of the line because we need housing here above all else, is what I'm hearing from a ton of stakeholders and what the reports keep saying to us. So, Commissioner Kingston, your suggestions are great, and I will float them up through the concierge services up to Vernon, into BI, because I've been on the receiving end with a project we were doing at the city of, an infinity loop essentially of deficiencies. And it can be really super frustrating. So you have some great suggestions, but to Commissioner, to the question here, the proposal on the table for ZOAC is the amendments to 51A.
And just so I can be clear, Ms. Thompson, it's obviously we're trying to understand how this will be reviewed globally. And so while I think these types of comments are probably helpful and important for us to share so that the whole policy is successful going forward, we'll focus our recommendations on 51A.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would welcome folks to just email me directly with ideas that are not related to 51A. And I'll work those suggestions in the same way that I work all the stakeholder comments.
Can I?
If I may, Commissioner Blair, I think Commissioner Kingston may have additional comments to.
I want to piggyback on yours.
Okay.
I appreciate Commissioner Kingston's statements, because if you're trying to do 51A and you're trying to do mixed income housing bonuses, but that has arterials in Chapter 52, Chapter 20 that impedes or challenges 51A, those arms that go to Chapter 20 and Chapter 52 must be resolved. Otherwise, what we're doing is for nothing. Mm-hmm. So when I sit next, I hear what Commissioner Kingston is saying, and I have had interactions with BI, and BI is stagnating when it comes down to managing zoning changes. So if we don't fix the problems in BI that are in Chapter 52A, then you're wasting your time and our time sitting here even discussing mixed income housing.
I agree with that. The other subject I wanted to touch on, and I'm new at this, so maybe this isn't in 51A or wouldn't be, but is there any consideration to including maybe some additional incentives for projects that incorporate a significant amount of energy efficiency features? I mean, I know that we have LEED standards, but we see very little use of solar, for example, in our commercial buildings in Dallas, yet we are a perfect place to implement solar. So I'm wondering if that's something that can be included in this package as we move forward. That's all I have. Thank you.
Well, and I would just like to make one clarification, and Mr. Vanderberg can speak if I don't get this exactly correct. I think all of us want to understand the full complement of what's going forward, and I think the comments to the other components that aren't necessarily 51A, but may be informed by what we are doing in 51A, are absolutely appropriate for everyone in this body, and I expect our commissioners will make comments as well when we get to that point in it. Is that a fair assessment?
Bert Vandenberg, Assistant City Attorney. Madam Chair, that is correct. I mean, you guys are talking about sort of a global concept. That's what Pam's brought before you, but the detailed comments should probably address the 51A changes, which is actually what this committee has purview over.
So in follow-up to Commissioner Kingston, do you have a follow-up?
Well, yeah, I do. I mean, I think that if we're having a public discussion about how we fix things, then even if it's not directly related to 51A, we should voice those concerns, because otherwise I don't know how we move this city forward.
Thank you. And we'll look forward to a robust discussion as we move forward. Mr. Reeves, Mr. Bering, I'm trying to keep an eye on my screen as well. Do y'all have comments, questions?
Yes, but I don't have them framed in my head yet, so I'll hold off for now.
Okay.
I just had one.
Mr. Bering?
I just had one probably minor, I guess, technical question I noticed in the literature. It looked like at one point it said a 15-year covenant or a 20-year covenant. Which one is proposed?
If there's 15 in there somewhere, we need to update that, because we are not proposing to modify the current code requirement for 20 years. There are some PDs that came in before the 20-year limit that have a 15-year limit, but everything going forward since 51A, 4.1100, and 20A, Article 2 were approved by council. Everything from that point forward was 20 years. And we don't have a recommendation to shorten that at all.
Did you have any follow-up, Mr. Bering?
No.
Okay. Well, I'll take a moment while perhaps my other commissioners gather other thoughts. In follow-up to Commissioner Kingston's question on the design standards, LEED is certainly something that we have in other parts of the code, and perhaps it should be considered as part of our design standards. But as we're looking at other elements that are currently in the mixed income housing bonuses, was there any consideration given of the open space standards? And I think we've seen a few of our planned development districts that have come through that have asked to not include those design standards. Is there any thought to making sure that the spirit and intent of those is maintained, even if there may be site constraints that don't allow all of them to move forward?
Pam, I think I can take this. And so in light of, for the current MIHD program, we're not, MIHDB program for those base districts, we're not proposing to make any modifications to those standards. For the Type 3 developments that are able to take advantage of the new menu of options, those are all still in PDs, which CBC and council have ultimate approval authority over. So when those come through for review, of course, staff will do a review and do their best to ensure that the whole project as a whole is meeting the overall intent of city policy and city code. But if open space, if CBC feels that open space should be prioritized in a specific area in a specific PD, that's what the PD process is for, is to determine what specific standards and specific development standards and design standards should be included in a development. So ultimately, that is part of that PD process and function.
So I guess the root of my question, though, was where we have seen planned developments come through seeking to utilize the bonuses, but have asked to be removed from some of the standards that are established with those bonuses. And so was that not anything beyond? I know some of these refinements we're looking at. So was this one that was considered? And whether it was open space or requiring the entries, essentially all the components that were in there, while open space is one that I think we have seen, but I think globally there has been requests made to not comply with the design standards. And I'm just asking how staff is reviewing that.
So I'll jump in on that, because I haven't been doing those zoning changes clearly from my work in housing, but I have been speaking up on those zoning changes when the staff recommendation goes forward. And in general, there is there's generally a line in the PD that exempts the PD from 4.1107, which is where the design standards are held. But my recommendation back to staff is always, to your point, Commissioner Hampton, that the intent of 4.1107 is maintained and strengthened in the PD. Because if we're going to move away from code, it should be to make the project better or to address specific site considerations. So to the extent that we can, just to reiterate, even though the PD says, there's an exception for, or it's exempt from 4.1107, generally there's design requirements in there that are the same as or stronger than 4.1107. And I'll tell you that there was one that came through that didn't have that, and I huddled with the staff that was assigned to that PD to make sure that we actually did get what we needed in terms of shade and trees and pedestrian amenities and transparency and doors and windows facing the street, and some kind of way of putting the parking behind and not in front, and the rest of the really quite basic design requirements that we have in 1107. I hope that helps.
It does, and I guess do we think it would be beneficial to codify in what we're looking at to say that, if you do exclude it, you must provide a landscape plan? Are there other considerations that might be added to ensure, and essentially to give more tools as we look at, I think the goal of this is also to make sure that it's flexible and that we're able to accommodate, different project requests, but to maintain the spirit of the ordinance.
I'll give that back to Stephen, because the landscape plan is not something that I'd thought of, but it's worth thinking about, unless it adds a layer of bureaucracy that will hamper production.
One thing that I don't like to do in ordinances is suggest things, because Bert will tell you you can't enforce a suggestion. So, but I think there may be something we can include there. I believe that our kind of general 51A section about PDs has some mention of a PD isn't warranted where if you just blow everything else out of the water, you can't just completely ignore the whole intent of anything the city's doing and do a PD. And then also the other problem is that no matter what we put into 41100, we write in a sentence into 41107 that says a PD that varies from the design standards shall, include a development plan. That PD can exempt itself from that section as well. So the PD can always just say, well, I don't have to do a landscape plan. Now, that's kind of the conflict we have with PDs is they write themselves, and they can exempt themselves and add their own requirements to themselves and all these things. And so that's where it comes back to, I think that it's responsibility of staff and the CPC and city council to ensure that the intent is met through that entire PD review process. I will do some looking and try to find some language that maybe we can plug in, because at least that will give us some direction. But we'll see what kind of language we may be able to find and slot in, and if Bert can find me something that is enforceable, then we'll do that.
Thank you, Mr. Doss. And I saw Commissioner Kingston and then Commissioner Blair.
Thank you. On that subject, one thing, Stephen, that you might take a look at, I don't remember the number of the PD, but it's the one for the design district. They have an option where if you cannot provide certain features on site, that you can provide those features within the PD, which, certainly for landscaping might be something to consider. Because one of my concerns about these type of programs that require everything on site is we have a lot of sites where if we do that, we're making the choice to tear down historic structures. And I think as a community, you're going to get a lot of pushback from that. And so some flexibility in that realm might be something that is beneficial in this process. Thank you.
Commissioner Blair?
getting back to what Commissioner Kingston started this whole conversation off with benefiting solar panels. And as I read this, my understanding, and if I'm wrong, please correct me. My understanding is that we want the flexibility in 51A 1107 to give the developers the opportunity to make subtle changes in order to get the mixed income housing bonuses. But what we are seeing with the use of PDs is that they go beyond the subtleness that we are trying to accomplish here, and will just do away with some of the standards. So I think what I was hearing Commissioner Kingston say about solar panels is a great opportunity to give bonuses if you're using that, because it does create a great bonus. So I don't know if the answer is to give a list that says if you do something like solar panels, you get to have this. If you do that, you get to have this, opposed to providing the developers with the option of using a PD to rewrite the entire code to do it their way.
If I may, what's in front of us is amendments to the mixed income section of 51A 4.1100. And I would like to recommend that we take this bonuses for green elements, for meeting LEED, for whatever else in our housing projects, and put it on our 2022 work plan and do it properly, because we wouldn't necessarily want to do this only for mixed income. We have a warming planet, and we have a need for these additional things, and we have the ability to do bonuses. But it's not necessarily something that is directly in front of us today, and I would hate to rush it and do it badly. So my request is to let us take that under consideration for adding to our work plan for 2022, and then come back as needed.
I expect you may hear that again, but thank you, Ms. Thompson. Related to this discussion on our base provisions and in looking at the type 3, one of the things I think that many on the commission have seen is that when we look at the percentages of the units that are required, the 5, 10, and 15 in the current structure, in type 3, it's suggested to be a minimum of 5% of the units. I guess my question is, we've seen a lot of projects that have come through below 5%. Is there a way to strengthen that language so that the 5 is the base, that it doesn't take 5% of units and then a project might come through asking for all the bonuses but ask for 3%?
This is why we have created this this recommendation. It is for exactly this reason, that we're hoping that a handful of very expensive developments will fund our One Dallas Fund. And we're hopeful that ZOAC, CPC, and Council will move through the approval process expeditiously so that we can start taking that money. And then in the draft that City Attorney is helping me with right now of how we use that fund, being able to fix that gap that's created by either lower affordability or higher percentage rates that make a deal not pencil, we can fix that with the fund. So that's kind of the whole purpose of this, is that, you know, somebody dumps $1 million into the fund and we use a portion of that $1 million to make somebody comfortable with 5% rather than 2.5%, or with 50% AMI rather than 80 to 100% AMI.
Okay,
Madam Chair,
that doesn't,
oh,
that doesn't sit well with me. I think if we're doing the types of incentives we're talking about, that they have to meet the minimum percentage. And, you know, what we might look at is, instead of the percentage of units, what percentage of AMI are they meeting? Because the new apartment in Uptown might be running for 140 or 160% of AMI, whereas a new unit in, you know, Old East Dallas might be only running for 110% AMI. And so maybe that's where your flexibility is. But I'm not in favor of giving flexibility in terms of the minimum number of units unless there's a fee that they pay on top of providing the units. Taking the fee in lieu money and putting it into these developments as incentives because they didn't meet the minimum doesn't make any sense to me. We should be using that fee in lieu money, which I know it's a slightly different topic, but it's related. We should be using that money to either do a city lease program or incentivize smaller infill developments, because, you know, we're talking about large developments when we're talking about these code amendments for the most part. And there's tons of opportunities to do a couple of units here, a couple of units there, and smaller infill developments that we could use those funds for in lieu of giving $1 million to the guy who's building the $100 million project who doesn't want to have affordable housing.
So
Thank
to
you.
be clear, if I may,
Please, Ms. Thompson.
to be clear, the proposal as we explained it last meeting is that we require a minimum of 5% regardless of what kind of bonus you're getting. And then the variability comes exactly that the more distressed an area is and the lower the AMI, the more of a bonus you get. So in our charts that we showed you last time around, a development in GH&I got the biggest bonus for providing units at under 50% AMI, and then progressively less as the AMI went up. And then a development in A, B, and C still needed to produce 5% of their units. A, B, C, D, E, and F still needed to produce 5% of their units. And again, a greater bonus at the lower AMI and less of a bonus as it went up in the AMI. And also to clarify then, our proposal is that you either do the units on site or you pay a fee in lieu, but you don't get to get money from the fund to do a development and not produce units. The money from the fund comes only for the purpose of producing units. So I hope that helps.
Follow up, Commissioner Kingston.
Well, maybe I just misunderstood what you said earlier, because I thought I understood you to say, and I thought I understood Commissioner Hampton's question to be, what about these proposals that are coming through where they're not even hitting the 5%? And that's the solution. And I thought I understood you to say that some of these funds might be used to get up to the 5%. If I misunderstood, that's fine. But if I didn't misunderstand, then I'm not in favor of that. I think they have to be providing the percentage of units. And if we're incentivizing them to provide more than that percentage of units, that's a different conversation.
Okay, so let me repeat back to you if I can, that what your suggestion is that regardless of whether your pro forma is broken at 5%, if you want the bonuses, you figure it out. You adjust your land basis, you adjust your construction costs, you do something to produce the 5%. And then if you want, and then you could use the money to produce more units on site. Is that what your recommendation is?
Yes. If they want the incentives, they have to give us the minimum. And if it breaks their pro forma, then it's not a project that works.
Okay. So the recommendation from Dr. Johnson that we've been working on based on his success in Bloomington and based on conversations, multiple conversations with stakeholders here, is that we have developers who are more than willing to do 5%. They're more than willing to do 5% under 60 or under 80. But it does break their pro forma, particularly in the middle of COVID with construction costs, with land costs going crazy, that sort of thing. As a secondary to that, we have a very functioning, although slow, underwriting process that clearly looks at people's pro formas to determine whether their pro forma really is broken or not, and then recommends a gap funding. And so the idea is to use this fund to offset the cost of providing affordable units on site in these mixed income developments in those areas where the numbers don't quite work. So rather than getting less housing and no affordability, we get more housing because they've used the bonus, and we get mixed income with a little bit of a use from the development fund.
Madam Chair, this is Mark Reeves. I finally have a couple of questions. If I can.
Mr. Reeves.
Thank you. Fee in lieu, I'm going to take a whack at that. What is the appropriate, when you're going to do a fee, you want some people to take advantage of the fee. You want some people to not take advantage of the fee. So what is the appropriate goal of how many developers will go the fee route, how many developers won't? Because if 100% of the developers are going the fee route, we know it's not high enough. If no one is ever going the fee route, right, we know it's probably too high. So what is the mix? What are you looking for? And it may develop by type too, because you may look at type 1 is a different percentage of what we're looking for than type 2 than type 3. So what's the ultimate mix ratio by type of the fee in lieu? What's the goal?
So I'll be brief because that's a little outside of Chapter 51A, but it's a good question. And my answer is similar to the answer when we put forward the original mixed income bonus, in that it's kind of hard to predict the economy, it's kind of hard to predict building, and it's really hard to predict construction and land costs. And so I don't know. I agree with you. If all of the developers are using the fee, we've set it too low and we need to fix that. If all of the developers are doing on site, then there's kind of no reason to do a fee. And so there's a space in between. I would rather measure this by production than by a potentially arbitrary ratio of, it should be 50% of developments using the fee, 50% not using the fee. I want to know, our NOFA program is blowing and going and is producing thousands of units in the pipeline right now. The current mixed income development bonus is producing thousands of units in the pipeline right now. I'd like to see that ramp up with this additional flexibility. But we certainly will be reporting back to council, who used the fee and who didn't, and then we'll have recommendations for changing it, I'm certain, because we don't know exactly where the sweet spot is for that.
So how does it get changed then?
It's a code amendment. It'll be in 20A. And so we'll take it to HHS and then take it to council if it needs to be changed.
It seems, and I see what you're saying, but it seems to me, though, if you're looking for total number of housing units, there needs to be you could potentially at least have a target range to start out of the fee in lieu, because if more people in the type 1 or the type 3 take the big developments, you mentioned something about the big developments pay the money, then do we want 3/4 of the big developments to pay that money because we can put those more affordable units somewhere else? Because that ends up getting to your goal. But again, it comes back to what is the appropriate goal of the fee in lieu, because if I get more from the big developers, I can build more units somewhere else. So it seems like, to me, it's not an either or. It seems like that is a direct connection.
Sure. And I'll say for 2022, our goal is to get the handful of folks that have said that they would pay the fee in lieu to actually do that for two reasons. One, so they can move forward with their development, and two, so we can fund this fund and then start using the money.
So, and to one last question about reviewing this fee, that's something that staff can say, or can three city council members say, we want to review this, we think it's blah, blah, blah. I mean, or does it come up 5 years from now when it should be 6 months from now? Does it come up from 6 months when it should be 2 years from now? So what are the various mechanisms if this needs to be adjusted? Like who raises their hand to take action on this?
Sure, we have a variety of mechanisms for that. One that we did in 2020 was that we created a staff and stakeholder driven work plan, and then prioritized that based on a lot of staff and stakeholder input, and then sent that to HHS, and then started had HHS essentially assign that work to the appropriate departments. We've also had, Bert would have to weigh in on this, I don't know the precise mechanism for having a series of council members or CPC commissioners request a review of something. Of course, this fee would be in 20A, so it wouldn't be a CPC purview, it would be council purview. And then one of the other things that we've done is that council members have essentially asked staff to look into something or have raised the issue, and staff has then talked with council members to see, is this something, and the city manager, is this something we want to move forward? And then it comes forward that way outside of the work plan and outside of city council members asking for something to be put on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to ask a follow-up to that. As we look at the One Dallas plan, and I believe what's before us in 51A is that the type 1 and type 2 can also pay into the One Dallas fund to meet the 50%, or excuse me, I wish it was 55% minimum, and then essentially pay the gap between whatever might be in their ordinance. But can you speak to how that would be evaluated? Because if it's base code, they're already at 5%. And so how is that being evaluated? And is there a consideration that this body needs to have in those provisions in our 51A?
So the 51A portion of this is what would the on-site requirement be? The 20A portion of that is what are the alternative ways to meet that requirement, should you choose to use the bonus. And we are currently contracting with a consultant who has been, for the last multiple months, has been talking with stakeholders about how to balance on-site versus off-site versus land dedication to make it so that this is truly an incentive. And they will be ready to come before council in December with a recommendation for a fee in lieu and the regulations that would need to go with that fee in lieu.
So at this point, staff's not recommending any standard within 51A in order to participate in One Dallas. It's simply referencing it.
So staff is recommending to participate in One Dallas. Staff recommends that you produce the units on site, or you do a dedication of land that is equivalent to the fee in lieu, or you pay into the fee in lieu. But yes, the fee in lieu amount will reside in 20A.
The changes that are related to fee in lieu and the actual number of units provided in 51A are, there is on page, I can see, basically we are required for all development types to get any kind of bonus, 5%, the minimum of 5 units. And then also, so on page 15 of the case report, it is sub 1106K. that is essentially an enabling clause that says, okay, we've talked about you have to get these bonuses, you provide 5%, the minimum of 5 units. Here in item K, you can meet this requirement by alternative methods as provided in Chapter 20A. So then Chapter 20A will then say, here's one alternative method. Pay the fee in lieu, here's the amount, what have you. Hey, here's land dedication is another alternative way to meet that. Here's the process and procedure for that. So all we're doing in 51A related to that is 5% or 5 units provided, and do it on site. If you don't want to do it on site, go to 20A and meet their provisions, provide alternate methods.
So it's actually, and I see Commissioner Kingston has some questions too, but I just want to close this out. It's actually in 2 sections, isn't it? Because it's both within the individual provisions of type 1, 2, and 3, which now reference the One Dallas options, and then the section K that can send you to 20A, which allows for either fee in lieu or council approved. Is that correct?
Actually check and see what I wrote here.
And for those following along,
missing
it's
a- I
pages
think I'm
13,
missing a
14, and 15 in the case report.
So we have, so essentially, so if we're in 1106, so page 13, the 5%, where did you put the 5%? So basically, so section 1106, H, I, and J give you, here's what specific bonuses are allowed for type 1. Type 1 are allowed the ones that are in your, that go to the base zoning district, look at that, here's how you get those bonuses. That there's no 5% rule for them.
Right, because that's got the whole
the
range.
minimum is 5, and then you get the other ones. Type 2 is whatever's in your, whatever's written into your PD already. You get whatever is in your PD, and then if you want to get the administrative and financial bonuses that are in other sections, you have to meet Chapter 28 requirements, which is 5% or 5 units. And then type 3, those new amended PDs, that specifically is where we say 5% total units with minimum of 5. And then if you're there, then 1, 2, 3, and 4, those are the bonuses. And then, yeah, for all of those, because K, we step out a level for K, all those requirements can be met by the alternate methods provided in Chapter 20A. So it is, you're right, there is a couple of places that it's in there.
And while I understand that One Dallas is not in our purview, for instance, if there is an existing PD and it has 3.5%, the gap, if you would be the 1.5 to get to 5% minimum in order to participate in One Dallas. Is that the intent? Or 5 units, whichever
5 units,
one.
whichever is, so it's 5% with a minimum of 5. So if 3% gets them to 5, then they've met that requirement. They can get those other, the administrative and financial.
The administrative, right. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Doss. Commissioner Kingston, did you have a?
Well, I just think that you think you're going to have the recommendations of your consultant on the changes for 20A by next month?
We've been collecting recommendations from the consultants all along. So yes, the last piece is how this fee in lieu actually works. And they've been working on that already. So it's a matter of pulling those thoughts together and testing them with they have a stakeholder group that they've been talking with of developers around the city, because developers tend to be a little more open with the consultant when the city's not in the room. And so that's been a really useful round of discussions, and they've gotten some really good feedback. So yes, the short answer is yes, that's our aim.
Okay. Well, I don't know about the rest of the commissioners, but I'd like to at least understand, conceptually what we're talking about for 20A as we're looking at these amendments, because I feel like I'm making these amendments in a silo without having all of the pieces to the ultimate puzzle.
I would, this is Mark Reeves, I would agree with that.
Yeah, I'm hearing some others can speak into the microphone as they wish.
I totally agree, because like I said earlier, our purview is 51A, but we can't complete the recommendations for 51A because we do not have all of the pieces of the puzzle. So when you look at it, and I over the last 2 weeks, I printed and read 20A, and I printed and read 51A, and you can't complete a development in 51A unless you have a completion in 20A. So without being able to, here, sit up and discuss what 20A, how 20A impacts 51A, and how, as a commissioner, when we have zoning changes that want to do mixed income housing fee in lieu of, we don't know if the developer is completing the whole process, because we are not at liberty to understand 20A and how it's impacting the developments in 51A. After listening to this, my thought process is that maybe 21A and 51A need to be the same, because if you cannot complete it, and then you're setting yourself up for failure. And that's not the goal here, is to set ourselves up for failure, because there is going to always be a developer who has an attorney on staff who's quite knowledgeable and will find one place that we didn't dot an I and cross a T and bankrupt us. Whether it's in making us give up the house and the car because we forgot to do something, and because we are so siloed that we can't talk to each silo.
Thank you, Commissioner Blair. Mr. Bering.
I would have a question, and I'll be the first to admit I do not have time to print and read other sections of the code. So I think my question will be pretty narrow to 51A. And it's a question of scale. I'm wondering if there's a way, if we can tier these incentives to more incentivize smaller projects. I'm concerned, for example, Mr. Doss mentioned a minimum of 5 units. And I think a lot of these incentives seemed biased toward bigger projects with institutional money. And a couple Saturdays from now, right, we have Small Business Saturday where we all got and shop local. And there's lots of studies that show shopping local keeps more money in the community. And I believe the same is true of development. So how do these programs incentivize a neighbor investor to rehab the old 10-room hotel, to create, units on a single lot, 8, 10, 12 unit developments in their community? Those type of projects seem totally left out of these incentives. Am I understanding that?
So they're not actually left out. We're fixing a few things because of these smaller projects. One of the reasons that we're fixing the parking requirement is to address the issue of 1-bedroom units, to make sure that we're not requiring more parking than per code. And one of the reasons that we're not recommending more open space in the by right section is because of these tighter spaces where, you know, you've got I have one project that's in front of me that was a 1920s building that was built with more units than is currently allowed by code. The building was burned. It came back. Some steps were missed, so they couldn't just be grandfathered in. And so now they're going to use the by right mixed income bonus to be able to do the 22 units rather than the 16 that they're allowed without the bonus. To your point about incentivizing the smaller projects, that's part of the benefit of the One Dallas Fund, is that if you want to just use mixed income the way it is, you can do that. If your pro forma breaks, you can ask for some money to make it work. And that's particularly important with these smaller, thinner, financially thinner projects to get a little bit of additional help. Because to your point, we need these smaller infill projects to come back to make these walkable, mixed use, mixed income communities that we used to have historically.
So the project example that you gave there, they're giving 6 affordable units out of 22. And is that all, you know, is that all their option, or are they incentivized to do any of that?
No, they're giving 5% out of the 22, so it's not very many. Under the One Dallas, they would have to go up to 5%. I'm sorry, they would have to go to 5 units. Under the current mixed income, they can do the 1 unit in there or the 2 units in their development, because we require them to round up currently. I lost my train of thought. I'm sorry. There's a lot of noise in the background.
Yeah, I always think we can do more to weight it towards, you know, the money circulates more locally in those type of projects.
Absolutely. My whole regional economics degree says that the money needs to stay here, and the more we spend it locally in smaller projects, the more it stays here. You know, if we're incentivizing a REIT and the money is in New York, that's where the money's going to go. And so we absolutely need to make sure that we're incentivizing these smaller projects, which is part of why we're doing this. You know, the giant project that's doing a high-rise expensive condo can pay into this fund, and then we can dole out money to these smaller projects to make them viable as well. Because from a regional economics, that actually draws money from somewhere else and pulls it here.
Right. Thank you.
And thank you, Mr. Bering. I'm going to do a time check for us. Actually, we do have a few minutes, but if I think we've got some final comments. So, Commissioner Blair.
And piggybacking what Mr. Bering said, that we need to incentivize the smaller end, those that have the pockets to do a development without bonuses and or financial considerations. They should be encouraged to do so. It's those that are less able to do that I would think that we would be trying to incentivize. So I get and I understand the process, but how do we make what we're saying work? I think that is that's the biggest question, because everything I'm hearing, it keeps the wealth where the wealthy are, and it keeps those that are less fortunate. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to be kind of Robin Hoodish, to take the wealth from the wealthiest and to help those that are less fortunate. Because one of the things that, when you look at the economic development plan, and I know that's not part of our purview, But when you look at the economic development plan, one of the things that stood out to me is that there is a plan to migrate some of the wealth, well, to not, I don't want to say migrate. The plan is to help those that are in the GH and I become more financially stable and financially secure, that they too can participate in the wealth of the city. So until we do mixed income housing, and that's this purview that fixes the challenges, we're not owning up to, and we're not following the economic development plan that has currently been adopted and approved by City Council.
So if I may,
Please, Ms. Thompson.
this mixed income, even without funding, this mixed income is creating voucher units in Uptown and Oak Lawn. It's incentivizing because it's part of the financial success of the Palladium development and the LDG developments because of the parking reduction mixed into the plan as it is right now. If ZOAC, CPC, and council approve this idea of a fee in lieu, it allows money to come from REITs, from high income investors, from family funds, whatever, to fund development in the city, to pay into our fee in lieu program, into our One Dallas fund, to then support development of affordable units in mixed income developments in the north, and neighborhood strengthening and just neighborhood investments and mixed income communities, including market rate units in the GH&I areas. And so this gives us a lot more flexibility to use local money to do exactly what Commissioner Blair is recommending. And I can say that it is likely to happen because even without funding, we have small developments, we have large developments, we have zoning cases that have gone through where they've asked for base zoning so that they can use the base zoning and produce mixed income housing and use the bonuses. And they're all over the city. They're in down by the former Redbird. They're down in, I've had some down on the far southwest side of town. I've got some in Oak Cliff. I've got some in West Dallas and Fort Worth Avenue. There are folks in far north Dallas that are using this. There are folks in East Dallas, and there are folks in the Uptown Oak Lawn area. And we've got one project that may come any day now in the Cedars. So they're really everywhere. Because the whole goal of this that we started with several years ago was to rebalance the city, essentially, mixed income communities everywhere, investment everywhere, so that you don't have to choose your job and then figure out how you're going to drive to your house, but instead you can live anywhere in the city that you would like to. So that's my long lecture on that. I apologize, but we have already been successful.
I'm at a loss because what I have seen, everything that affordability as we see it today, the concentration is south of 30. When you talked about LDG and you talked about Redbird, those are very, very near and dear to my heart because they're in my district. But if you're saying that if those particular developers had been given the opportunity to if fee in lieu had been already provided, and those developers had been given the opportunity to use money from fee in lieu, then we would not have needed to have incentivized housing, and it would be more of they could get the bonuses, they could have the height, they could have all the other things that they got with the affordability program, that they would have been able to get that if they would have been able to use fee in lieu in mixed income housing. Is that what I'm hearing?
Did already take advantage of the mixed income program through the parking reductions. For Palladium, it was just the parking reductions. With LDG, I can't remember whether they needed additional dwelling units per acre as well, or just the parking reduction. But they did already use the bonuses to make their projects viable. If we had the fee in lieu available, we would have been able to be more responsive to the concerns that we heard about not having enough market rate development units in those developments, and we could have offset the cost of the market rate units at those developments with the One Dallas Fund as it's currently proposed.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Mr. Reeves, I believe I saw your hand.
Yes, question for Ms. Thompson. Do you have a map of these developments that could be, it's color coded with, exactly where these units are across the city of Dallas, potentially?
I don't have a map, but I can certainly get our policy analyst to pull one together for me, and we can share that with ZOAC.
Because I don't mind, in a way, this would be, if this is being successful where we want it to be, then we can see that. And if it's not exactly where we want it to be, then we can tweak it. I mean, because we need to see where we are, and we want to throw the gas and the extra air in the area where we want it, not where we don't want it. So it's like, it's amazing. We always get exactly what we incentivize people to do most time. If you want fraudulent salespeople, have them tell something where they can be fraudulent. It's like we can steer this. So I personally like to see where that is. And I'd also like to say, Ms. Thompson, me personally, I can't speak for the others, of course, but I'm not picking on you. I know your heart is super in the right place. We work together on this sort of stuff. So thank you for all of this. I don't want you to feel like I'm picking on you or anything like that, because I know your heart's in the right place, and you helped me immensely with this exact component on the Near East Side and some other developments as well. So thank you for your work in this. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Reeves. Mr. Hall, any final comments? No. Or thoughts? Okay. Commissioner Kingston?
Thank you. I want to echo what Mark Reeves just said. I know that this is a complex problem, and it takes a lot of attention to detail and the perspective of a lot of different people to come up with a solution that's actually going to work for the city. And I appreciate what staff has done this far. Today's presentation, I think, brought into focus a lot of the things that seemed far too nebulous to me last time. I'm not there on everything you're proposing, but that doesn't mean I can't get there. So I may reach out to you, Pam, and so we can have a conversation. I appreciate your work, though.
So, I was going to wrap this up. Commissioner Blair.
I too echo what has been said. Ms. Thompson, we do respect you and the diligence that you put into your knowledge level and your willingness to always sit down and explain stuff. And I too, because there is so much that you probably forgot that I will never be able to have the time to learn. The goal and what I think everyone here, including myself, is I love the city of Dallas. I may not have been born and raised here, but I love the city of Dallas. And I look at it as my city. I need it to be a city that all of us, no matter of your social economic standings, can be proud of. And that's the goal that I believe that we're all trying to accomplish.
So thank you all, and I will echo my colleagues. I think we're all grateful for the time and the clear knowledge that Mr. Dawson and Ms. Thompson have brought to this discussion. I am going to take a pass at sort of summarizing what I heard from today's discussion, and if my commissioners and members will speak up if I've missed something. So the items that have come from today were to look at reviewing the design standards for other provisions such as a landscape plan, or whether provisions provided within either a PD or an area might be appropriate, just to strengthen the language that we have and make sure that the spirit is carried forward. To look at our type 3 developments for the language to further strengthen the 5% minimum requirement. Also to look at the existing MVA categories, how those are distributed, and whether there should be additional incentives for our smaller projects and our MVA G through I areas. And then if we could just have a little bit more context provided on the 20A considerations. Ms. Thompson, I believe you mentioned that you would have some of that information just so that we can see if there's any other tools that this body should be considering within 51A. Did I capture everyone's discussion? Mr. Reeves, you are on mute if you're speaking.
Yes, also the map of the existing, what is working and where across the city.
Okay,
Units.
I will, got it. I put that within the review, but map, we will specifically state.
Thanks.
Yeah. All right, thank you all. Any further discussion? If not, we'll move to our last item, which is considering our minutes. Ms. Moorman, I believe we have a revision.
Yes, to the minutes that you all received, I believe yesterday, there's a revision to those that reflects that ZOAC member Rangel was not in attendance at the last meeting due to a conflict of interest on the only item on the agenda, so she will not be considered absent. However, it was because she was not here because of conflict with the item, which is the same case today. So she won't be considered absent.
Thank you for that clarification. And so with that, do I have a motion to approve the minutes as revised from October 21st?
I move that we accept the revised minutes as presented today.
Thank you, Commissioner Blair. Do I have a second? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hall. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion or minutes are adopted. Any further, just that was all on our agenda. So with that, I believe we are adjourned at 10:07 a.m. Thank you all for being with us today. Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Thank you, Mr. Doss, Mr. Castillo, and all of staff.